Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Heritage Foundation at the Freedom Center here in Washington, D.C. What a great turnout. I want to thank all the media for being here, those who are watching online, Heritage members all across the country. What a great opportunity to get together and discuss something that's really remarkable. All of us know that there's been great upheaval this year, not just in the U.S., but across the whole world. We saw it with Brexit. A lot of people wondering what was Brexit all about, and it really is pretty simple. People wanted their country back. They were tired of centralized bureaucracy, people in other lands, other capitals making decisions for them. It was simply sovereignty and self-determination. We saw that here in America with Donald Trump being elected president. People do want their country back. He said things like, you don't have a country if you don't have borders, things that we had been told we could not say any longer as conservatives. He talked about trade agreements working for the best interest of America. He talked about government working in the best interest of its people. And there's still people here in Washington and in the media who don't seem to understand that simple idea. People know that their government here in Washington is not working in their best interest. And we've had leaders for a number of years talking about it. Reagan explained very simply that government is not the solution to our problem, it is our problem. And our speaker today led one of the greatest revolutions for the people in 1994 with his Contract for America. He didn't just ride a wave of public opinion, he helped to create it by showing people and explaining to them exactly what was wrong. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was. That revolution lasted a while, but I'm afraid our Republican colleagues did not carry through on a lot of those ideas. And we've seen this bubbling up across America for a number of years. We certainly saw it in 2010 with the Tea Party, of people just tired of government invading their lives, tired of bailouts, tired of the government not representing them. And then in 2012, the Republicans lost a big election, going back to their old way of doing things. But 2014, you saw it spring up again as senators and congressmen campaigned to repeal Obamacare, to control our borders, all the things the consultants said that we couldn't do. And this has been bubbling up. I took out Newt's book last night, knowing he would be here today, Breakout. The introduction of that makes a pretty important point. Talks about a little girl, Abigail, with cancer. Knowing there were drugs that had been in tests that could actually help Abigail. The things that she, her parents went through, and even people all over the country, trying to get the FDA to give her the opportunity just to try. But they wouldn't. And as you look at this government and these agencies, and I'm sure Newt might detail some of that today, as you look at the Food and Drug Administration and wonder, are they hurting more people than they're helping? Is the Environmental Protection Agency actually hurting our environment more than it's helping? Is our education department hurting our students and diminishing their opportunities in life? Everywhere you look, it's hard to find a government actually working in the best interests of the people. I think that's what this last election about. And a lot in the media have tried to cast this as some kind of negative populism or something. But hopefully it's a wake-up call. People who come here to Washington, take an oath of office to stand for the Constitution and to represent the people that would actually do that. There's no one who's been more involved in this over the last several decades than Newt Gingrich. I've seen it up close and personal. What he did in 1994 inspired me to run for Congress in 1998. And though he left the same time I walked in the door, he's continued to inspire and break new ground in a lot of his thinking and his ideas. And he's worked closely with Donald Trump over the last couple of years been a great advisor and I think played a key role in helping Trump navigate a political environment that he had never waded into before. But I could see Newt Gingrich in a lot of the policies and a lot of the ideas. And we're real honored to have him back here at Heritage. He's a regular. I'm real proud of him. And Newt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Senator, thank you very, very much. And Clifton and I are always delighted when we have an opportunity to come back to Heritage. I have to say that going back when Ed Fulner and I were dramatically younger, we used to meet over on Stanton Circle, and when Heritage was much smaller, and we had this vision, and then Reagan got elected, and a number of things happened, and to be back here at this moment, I think, is exactly right. This is the third great effort to break out of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt model. 1980 was the first one, and Heritage played an absolutely decisive role, both in the run-up to that election and to the actual administration. The mandate for leadership remains today the best single pre-election development of policy ever done, with over 2,000 recommendations, of which over 60% became policy, and with over 250 volunteers around the country based on their expertise, most of whom ended up actually implementing the chapters they wrote. So they walked in with a real understanding of what they needed to do. In 1994, Heritage helped with the contract with America. And I think it's fair to say that as we developed ideas over that period, the balanced budget, the only balanced budgets in your lifetime, were developed with close work with Heritage. Welfare reform was developed with close work with Heritage. And again, the whole concept of the contract drew much of its strength from working with the Heritage Foundation. Today, I think Heritage is a key source for the Trump-Pence team, for their ideas, and for what we need to get done. So I was thrilled to be asked to come and share some ideas with you. I have really 5 key messages that I'm going to try to go through briefly and then take questions. First, that President-elect Trump is a unique historic figure worthy of study in his own right. Second, that Trumpism is a bold and profoundly different way of thinking that needs codification and development through action. Third, the combination of inertia and the relentless hostility of the left will challenge the very survival of Trumpism. Fourth, millions of Americans will have to work for Trumpism to succeed. We have 513,000 elected offices in the United States. And for us to be able to develop the ideas, implement the ideas, win the arguments at City Council, County Commission, school board, across state legislature, all of these things are possible, but it takes an enormous movement. And then finally, I want to talk very briefly about us. You know, what do people who are activists and who are in this room and similar rooms around the country have to have an obligation to do? Because we're going to have to overcome the bitter hostility, and make no bones about it. There will be bitter hostility from the entrenched left in the media, the academic world, and the bureaucracy. At every step, every day, they will seek to unrail and defeat what we're trying to accomplish. So each of us has to be part of a movement of active citizenship. Now, I want to start with what may be obvious, but because so many of our friends in the media don't seem to get it, I thought I would take a moment. President-elect Donald J. Trump is a unique American leader. People don't really stop and think about how unique. No one, let me repeat, no one has won the presidency without having held public office or served as a general in the military. Just start there. He is automatically unique. Trump has been a national figure for a much longer time. One of the great joys of, I just produced a book called Electing Trump, this little electronic book that we put up of my columns and newsletters over the last 2 years. And part of the joy of it is to look at it and go back and read and realize All of the famous, extraordinary people who show up on TV and write commentary in the New York Times, the Washington Post, they weren't just wrong. They were wrong about being wrong. They have learned, they have learned nothing, and I'll show you that in a minute. So you have to realize Donald Trump wasn't some, person who showed up one morning. In 1988, Oprah asked him if he's going to run for president. Now, this is not a question you ask many people. He said at the time, probably not unless the country got in real trouble. In 1999, he is on Larry King and he announces he's forming an exploratory committee. He does that for about 3 months and figures out by exploring that George W. Bush has locked up the nomination, and because he is a rational businessman who doesn't believe in throwing money away, he doesn't run. In January of 2015, Callista and I were at the downtown Marriott in Des Moines, a famous place for anybody who follows American politics. And Trump was also there. We were there for a conference that Steve King and Dave Bossie of Citizens United were hosting. Actually, it was the coming out conference at that point of Scott Walker, who at that stage would have been voted by almost everybody more likely to be nominated than Donald J. Trump. And Trump called us and said, would we have breakfast with him? And for about 45 minutes, he asked us about the campaign we'd waged in 2012, what did we learn, what was it like, what should he think about. And it was clear at the end of that conversation that he was seriously thinking about it. But this is the first real break point. Normally what happens at that stage, if you are a normal political ambitious person, you hire 3 or 4 consultants to tell you what you should think. They promptly tell you you should focus on raising money, which they will spend to do focus groups to tell you what you should believe. And if you raise more money, they will then do advertisement that will indicate how smart you are because they're really smart, and they would prefer you not to do anything except listen to them and raise money. You try that around Donald J. Trump, and he just runs over you. I mean, it's hopeless. I was asked one time, as part of this process, I was on Bill O'Reilly one night in the very heat of the primary season. And O'Reilly said to me, why don't the Republican candidates attack Trump? He's clearly the front runner. They need to attack him. And I said, Bill, Donald Trump is the grizzly bear in The Revenant. If you get his attention, he will get awake. When he gets awake, he will walk over, bite your face off, and sit on you. The other candidates watch him do that and go, not me. No. Let the bear eat. It's okay. I don't want to bother him. And that started with low-energy Jeb. He has this, people, again, people forget who Donald J. Trump is. I mean, all these people in the news media, and this is a major part of the watershed we're in the early stages of, and why I so much wanted to come here and share with you today. This is a genuine watershed. There is an old world that's much deeper than just liberalism. And there is the post-November 8th world, if we can make it real. I tell everybody, the Trump rally has to be turned into a Trump reality, and there's a big gap in those two, and it's going to take a lot of work. So people in the elites couldn't figure out that this is a guy who'd made his entire living marketing to consumers. That he had thought every day, how do I get you to come to my golf course? How do I get you to come to my hotel? How do I get you to come to my casino? How do I get you to buy my tie? How do I get you to watch my TV show? And so he has this intuitive, we were talking about debating one day, and he said, what's your advice? And I said, I don't have any advice. I said, you're a better debater than I am. Because he's a totally different debater than I am. I'm not denigrating myself, I'm okay. But he intuits the audience in a way I can't do it. I cannot get the rhythm the way he does. And so you had low-energy Jeb, which is, by the way, totally untrue. I mean, Jeb Bush is a perfectly fine guy, was a great governor of Florida, is a good friend of ours. But he said it in such a way that it stuck to such a degree it got inside Jeb's head. And Jeb ends up running around New Hampshire, literally running, to prove he's not low energy. This is not easy. I mean, this is, and I'm just telling you, one of the great disgraces of the propaganda media we have, which is what we should, all of us on the right should describe the propaganda media, drop the term news media till they earn it, and begin to realize that the propaganda media cannot come to grips with the level of talent that they're dealing with. So, I would say to you and I will, brief commercial, Electing Trump is available online. It's an ebook. And I try to outline the campaign as it unfolded, because early on I was just puzzled. The first break point for me was the Fox News debate in August, when Trump and Megyn Kelly got into a brawl. And if you go back and watch, after that debate, everybody in the elite, including Frank Luntz and his focus group, which tells you something about focus groups, which are social organisms. So they talk themselves into positions they don't believe. A very key part of what happened in 2016 is you finally had a guy with the guts to say, nah, that's not true. And then people said, well, I didn't think it was either. So I'm watching, Clifton and I there that night, we watched the debate. And then I'm watching after the debate, all these people are pontificating. And they're unanimous that Trump had lost. Now, there were still 16 other candidates at that point. And on the internet, on the various voting things for different, and not just on right-wing places, 70% of the people voting were picking Trump. And I'm sitting there as a historian going, okay, all of the elites believe this, and 70% of the American people believe this. Now, this is an anomaly so large that you have to stop and admit you don't understand what's going on. And that's really how I spent most of last year. I would wander around and go, well, that was weird. And then something else would happen. So remember, when I talk about President-elect Trump being unique, he defeated 16 Republican candidates. Let me repeat this. I want you to get in the head, because nobody in the Washington Post and the New York Times gets this yet. He defeated 16 candidates, many of whom were first-class candidates. So we're not stupid people. Governors, senators, and one of the characteristics was simple. They would show up and they would say to the audience, I have been a successful governor. And people would say, thought so, not him, next person. Because the country had decided they wanted somebody who would kick over the table. They didn't believe Washington could be managed. They agreed with the Gallup poll in which 75% of the American people said there's widespread corruption. Widespread corruption. 25 million Americans, according to Gallup, had dropped out of the middle class, and they were mad. And there was a general sense that Washington was out of control. 63% of the Republican voters were mad at their own leadership. And so you'd show up and say, hi, I've been working really hard in Washington. They go, thought so. Next person. It was like a casting thing. We were talking to someone the other day who goes to these casting things for opera and stuff. And she said there's one particular group that literally in mid-first song will take your stuff and put it through the shredder while you're watching. She said it's very demoralizing. Well, that's what was happening to very fine people. They'd gone out there and the audience was going, ooh. And the one person who came close was Ted Cruz, who was a Princeton debater and a Harvard law graduate, had a great speech on the potential for kicking over the table. In addition, he could prove that he was prepared to disrupt the Senate because he had been totally disruptive. And so people could say, yeah, this is a guy who clearly is not going to work with the Senate because he doesn't. And halfway through his great speech, Trump would walk onto the stage, kick over the table, and walk off. And people go, okay, theoretical speech, kicked over table. Which do I want? And then, of course, everybody would attack him on junk like, you once went bankrupt. And you go, yeah. And the people go, yeah, but he's going to kick over the table. Or, you've been married 3 times. Yeah, but he's going to kick over the table. Or whatever, whatever they came up with as the next story. And people go, yes, and he's going to kick over the table. And nobody in the elite media could figure this out. And neither, by the way, could the other candidates. That he had figured out what the country was desperate for. And the great challenge to the Trump-Pence administration is going to be to get up every morning and remember they're not here to accommodate Washington. They're here to kick over the table. And let's be very clear about something, because I'm watching it now, and luckily I'm old enough I don't get too angry about it. I just get sort of amused. The same, and I'm going to use a word that's very harsh, but I'll explain it in a minute. The same idiots who failed to understand that Trump was going to win the nomination, then failed to understand that Trump was going to win the general election, are now commenting on Trump's cabinet. I mean, none of these media said, gosh, you were wrong. It'd be like having a sports reporter who misreported a football game by talking about how many home runs were hit. You know, you'd get a new reporter. Well, all of these people, I mean, you have people out here who are on TV and in the New York Times and the Washington Post who have been consistently wrong now for 2 solid years. And they get promoted because their editors were even more wrong. And then they tell us what they think, which is junk. So it's very important to put this in context. These are the same people who are as wrong about the cabinet as they were wrong about the general election, as they were wrong about the primary. Just keep that in mind every time you hear them. It's one of the reasons I'm frankly proud to be on Fox, because we were only wrong about half the time. And last year, that was a miracle last year compared to some of the networks which were not in touch with the planet Earth. You know, remember, it was the professional billion-dollar Clinton campaign being run on behalf of the inevitable next president, which forgot that there's an electoral college. I mean, think about that. I mean, Trump, who's supposed to be an amateur and doesn't know what he's doing, had figured out that actually, because people kept saying you got to get to 270, he said, oh, you mean getting to 270 really matters? They'd say, yes, you need to. Now, as a businessman, you go, okay, so we're going to keep score by like 270. And they said, yes. So he said, okay, so I'm not going to California, I'm not going to go to New York, and I'm not going to go to Illinois. And I'm going to get killed in all 3 states, but it won't matter. Because if I carry Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, I'll be the president. They go, yeah, you actually broke the code. And with Reince Priebus' help, and to be fair, Chairman Priebus deserves a lot of credit for this, because he is from Wisconsin, they figured out the last weekend that if they went into Milwaukee, the Democrats might go into Milwaukee. But if they went into Minneapolis, you can go back and look at the coverage. If they go into Minneapolis, the national media will say, these guys are so stupid. They think they're going to carry Minnesota. They're not ever going to carry Minnesota. And you can go back and watch these guys on the shows on Sunday. I don't know why they're being this stupid. Well, what they knew that apparently nobody in the Washington press corps knew was that Minneapolis television covers southern Wisconsin. So they were getting all of the coverage of southern Wisconsin without letting the Democrats think about Wisconsin. And the Democrats knew they couldn't compete, and they weren't going to carry Minnesota, so they didn't worry about it. So she went off somewhere. I don't actually know where she went, because by that stage, I wasn't paying any attention. So remember, it's the smaller, less expensive Trump team that actually figured out the keys to the American system. And you have to give, particularly the core group towards the end, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Jared Kushner, who did just an amazing job, Brad Parsky, whose work with information technology was remarkable. And they were handling the candidate part of the campaign, while Reince Priebus and Katie Walsh and others had 7,500 field workers, having learned the lessons of 2012. So there was this synergistic impact of Trumpism on television and in big rallies and on the internet, with a systematic RNC, probably the biggest since Mark Hanna, that really came together, and we won. Now, at that point, of course, the media went into a state of shock. But the center of all this, the person without whom it would not have happened, is Donald J. Trump. And I think you have to remember, it was his vision of making America great again. It wasn't just that he's a good, articulate guy and he's a good PR guy. No, he had a message. It was a message the other candidates didn't understand, couldn't articulate. And he would say again and again, we can make America great again. And then he would communicate it. He had an instinct to combine 2 very different things: huge rallies and Twitter and Facebook. So I think he currently has like 25 or 28 million people on Twitter and Facebook. Now, what did that mean? Well, as you grow Twitter and Facebook, which he was doing all through the fall of 15, it means you can decide on a Tuesday, oh, let's go to Tampa Friday afternoon. You then tweet everybody in Florida. At no cost, by the way. This is why billion-dollar campaigns aren't necessarily indicative of being smart. You go to Florida, and 30,000 people show up. All 30,000 bring smartphones, so they're all taking your picture. And if you watch, he's very good. He gets up there, he stops, he lets everybody take his picture. What do they do with their picture? They put it in Facebook. They put it in Instagram. So 30,000 people becomes notionally a minimum of 1,200,000 person network. About 3 times the size of MSNBC. And because you're drawing media coverage, your rallies on television live for free. Now, the key breakpoint to me was the night of the Florida primary, and Cliff and I don't watch. It was just, we know him well enough. There's a certain points here where you just have to break up. He's selling Trump wine, Trump water, Trump steaks, and he's doing 2 things. Remember, this was the point where Mitt Romney had been his nastiest. And it suggested that Trump wasn't a real businessman, even though he was worth approximately 50 times as much as Mitt. Which makes one wonder, if he's not a real businessman, what was Mitt? I mean, but anyhow, that's a different story. We're not going there this week. So the second thing he's doing, though, was he was testing the networks. And the network, Hillary starts to speak. I've never seen this ever before in American history. Hillary starts to speak, and not a single network covers her. Because they all understand in the age of the clicker, everybody will leave. Because they want to see what else Trump's bringing out. I mean, he's going to bring it, you're going to get a camel. I mean, what is going to, who knows what he's going to do next? By the way, one of my great failures in the campaign, I challenged him to ride an elephant into the convention. Wouldn't do it. He thought there were certain limits, even with his showmanship, that there were certain limits. So what you have to remember is he had an instinct for totally dominating the media. I'd say the only other president who really had the totality that Trump has is Abraham Lincoln. There's several great books on Lincoln and his ability to deal with the media and how well he understood it. And so what do? You get a thank you tour. Now, there are 2 really good reasons for a thank you tour. One is it dominates the media, and I've had a theory going back to Reagan that you have to have rabbits that the media can chase or they will invent their own. So you should I think Romney, by the way, was a 2-week-long rabbit. I mean, they all go, we got to talk about Romney today. And Trump's going, good, that's good. It's better than the other things you could talk about. But second, he draws strength. This is really important. I hope he does rallies for his whole presidency. He draws the strength of reminding himself he is the tribune of the American people, not of Washington. And it's very important for him to see 10, 15, 20,000 people and be reminded that he speaks for them. And therefore, he has a moral authority that nobody in the bureaucracy and nobody in the Congress has. It's very important if Trumpism is going to succeed. And I would say to you that the only rise comparable to Trump is Lincoln's rise from 1857 to 1860. There's nobody else, because remember, this is an almost entirely Trump-manufactured rise. This wasn't consultants, it wasn't polling, it was a continuous application of intuition matched up with an unbelievable amount of energy. And it's part of what worked. And the only other person I know who personally managed that kind of rise was Lincoln. So Trump now is in an amazing place. And it is astonishing to me, as a historian, how the elite media has missed all of this. They are so rabid. They are so ideologically committed. They are so terrified of the future that they can't stop and ask themselves, what is this anomaly? What is this remarkable thing? What is it we should know about the next president of the United States? They just can't do it. And you see it even in today's stories. Now, I'm going to get to that in 1 second. So it's amazing to me how much the elite media and many of the think tanks, not Heritage, have attacked Trump instead of studying him. And I'm going to surprise you all. It's interesting. It happened to be today that I think it's the Washington Post ran a piece on the degree to which Trump is appointing an Ayn Rand cabinet, which I presume is what they think of as part of the alt-right. Ayn Rand is the kind of person on the left that you never read, but you once saw the cover of the book. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, and you'll see why. But I want to make an argument. In fact, I had begun writing this before somebody sent me. Sean Kennedy actually sent me the article from the Post, which talks about how they're citing it all in terms of the fountainhead. I'm arguing that he is in fact an anti-John Galt. If you look at Atlas Shrugged, which is her great classic, John Galt is this billionaire who withdraws from society because he is so sick of the welfare state, and he is so sick of redistribution, and he is so sick of the idea that creative people are being drugged down by non-creative people. It is, in fact, both defensive and cowardly. All of these people are so incompetent, he's withdrawing from the fight. He's going off to a mountain fastness where they are now going to go on strike, and all the creative people are going to refuse to be creative, and therefore the society will grind down. Now, again, if you had had Ayn Rand's experience and come out of the Soviet Union, this might have seemed plausible, especially if you'd read the New York Times' totally misleading coverage of the Soviet Union in that period. But Trump's totally different. Where John Galt retreats, Trump attacks. Where John Galt goes to a mountain fastness, Trump goes to the American people. Where John Galt withdraws, Trump says, let's have a movement. Where John Galt says, it's really over and all we can do is hold up in a mountain fastness, Trump says, why don't we make America great again? So in a sense, it's a wonderful civic overlay that says the real road to freedom and the real road to individual liberty and the real road to opportunity is to arouse the American people and with them take back their country. And he's living it out. And that makes him, I think, an extraordinary figure as compared to traditional politicians. And think about it. He could have gone to Mar-a-Lago and hidden. That would have been the John Galt withdrawal. He could have gone to 15 different golf courses and hidden. Instead, he voluntarily decided to go into the public arena, knowing, and this is a guy who'd survived New York media. I mean, he knew it was going to be vicious, nasty, and personal because it had always been that way in New York. And he said, yeah, I think trying to lead America is worth paying the price, both financially and personally. So he announced we could solve our problems. We could make America great again. Instead of leaving the American people behind, Trump went to the American people, aroused their spirit, and gave them hope. Trump is an optimist, where Galt was a pessimist. Trump is on permanent offense, where Galt was on defense. If you attack Trump, he immediately counterattacks. And the media doesn't it's not a function of personality. It's because he learned with the New York media, you hit back as fast as you can so you're in the next edition. You know, you never let them get by with hitting you. And it's part of a style. If you show him an opening, he'll take it. Yet Trumpism, I think, is much more than just motion. It's much more than just being active. Trumpism is ultimately, and at its heart, an appeal to the American people. Think about the phrases that worked. Trump is the classic American tradition. He's in the tradition of Washington, Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, FDR, and Ronald Reagan. And by that I mean, in every case, they believed in the American people, they aroused the American people, and they led the American people to victory over entrenched, powerful interests. Trump personally is a combination of Andrew Jackson, Theodore Roosevelt, and P.T. Barnum. And I think this is the best way to understand it. He is as disruptive as Jackson. He is as energetic as Theodore Roosevelt. And he sells all day, every day, exactly like P.T. Barnum. And by the way, he likes that analogy. He thinks selling is fine. Selling is good. Selling is what you should do. If you don't have something worth selling, go get something. But you ought to be actively out there saying, I got something good here. Why don't you come look at it? Yet, I think the 2016 victory is much more than just a personal achievement. First of all, remember, you now have more Republican state legislators than any time in the history of the party going back to 1854. We're over 4,100 legislators. You have 34 governors. You have control of the Senate. You have control of the House. There is an underlying thing which has been building, which started with Reagan in 80, and we renewed it in 94. And there have been detours when you've had Republicans who didn't get it and who tried to govern as part of the elite. But the country below that, and look at the election of 2010, 2014, there's a 2015 in Kentucky. I mean, there's been a continuous steady migration. And 25 states now have Republican governors and Republican legislators. Total control. And that's why you have to have a movement. Because if you're in control, what are you in control for? What are the principles you're going to apply? How are you going to be different? We've just begun the work. I said to the president-elect shortly after the election, all you've done is won a ticket to the dance. Now we have to dance. And we have to dance for 8 solid years so well that the country in 2024 elects another Republican, establishing firmly that we have replaced the FDR model and that we now are in a period of very different government. And think about the phrases Trump used. Make America great again. You can't get more politically incorrect. Can you imagine before last year if you'd walked into a typical Ivy League university and said, my goal when I graduate is to make America great again? They'd have kicked you out. They said, you know, you're a weird nationalist who clearly doesn't understand the larger global nature of making everyone great again. And by the way, the word great's wrong because it implies there might be some people who aren't great, and we should all be great. So why don't we be equally great, and we'll give out greatness cups to everybody, and they can all feel great. I mean, I write him, is this not what Trumpism is in rebellion against? Then you have the amazing contrast between protect America's borders versus Hillary's dream, as she said to the Brazilian bankers, of an open border for the entire Western Hemisphere so that 600 million people could visit the U.S. when they wanted to. Trump believes you should actually fight for trade deals that create rather than kill American jobs. Now, if you are the elites, you wonder why you'd worry about doing that, because all those jobs he's talking about are in the flyover country, and those are people you never meet anyway. Trump actually believes we should defeat ISIS. He actually said that we should protect Christianity. He said just 2 nights ago, it's okay to say Merry Christmas again. I mean, the endless, vicious, uncaring assaults on the left by things like saying Merry Christmas are just going to, you know, drive the country apart. He says we should drain the swamp, a position held by almost everybody except the swamp. He wants to end the corruption that Gallup reports 75% of the American people believe is widespread. He thinks that we should speak bluntly and deliberately and methodically break up political correctness. So you look at it again and again, these are chords of Trumpism that resonate with normal Americans. You say to normal Americans, I'm proud of the American flag. And they all resonate. And then you look at the current president who's explaining why it's totally appropriate for somebody to express themselves by not standing up during the playing of the national anthem, because after all, they might have a meaningful and deep need to communicate in some way the depth of their unfamiliarity with what is actually happening. And we should be sympathetic to the level of confusion multimillionaire athletes have at a country which has treated them so badly that they only have 7 Rolls Royces and 3 houses. I mean, this is why the country voted for Trump, because they look at this kind of junk and they say, okay, I get these 2 futures. I get nutcake weirdness and I get normalcy. And to the great shock of the Washington Post and the New York Times, nutcake weirdness lost. I mean, it was a very, very bold and decisive moment. People came to the rallies not just to see Trump, but to hear him. And this is why I think Trumpism is real. It was the messages far more than the messenger. I mean, he's a brilliant messenger. But if Trump had come and sounded like a normal left-winger, people would have left and said, well, that was sure weird. Think about the people who wore the hats that said, Make America Great Again. I remember being at Kennesaw State College at a rally shortly after Hillary Clinton had talked about the deplorables. And 3 women came walking up wearing T-shirts that said, I'm an adorable deplorable. That's when we began to realize not only is this really a movement, this is a movement that's prepared to fight. You want to call us names, we'll wear the name proudly and then we'll run over you. I mean, I hope a lot of the adorable deplorables will send T-shirts to Hillary for Christmas. You know, when the elite media smeared, or what I would prefer to call the propaganda media, smeared Trump, the American people sided with Trump. And the New York Times was the worst offender among the print media. It's hard to say who was the worst offender among TV, but because they were so aggressively competing with each other. But you know, when the New York Times prints an article about Trump's bad behavior towards women, and the woman who's the centerpiece of the article holds a press conference and say, they just printed the opposite of what I told them. He was a gentleman, he was a nice guy, and I can't believe they lied this. I mean, that's that moment when you realize something profound is breaking in the old order. And that the old order in its desperation is getting clumsy and stupid. A genuine revolution was building. I believe going back to 1980 and to the contract with America in 1994. And the campaign culmination of defining the Trump movement and Trumpism, and I urge you to read these two, was the remarkable speech on October 22nd at Gettysburg, where he outlined a contract with the American voters, but it's much deeper, it's much richer. I think it's the archetype of what I mean by Trumpism, and it's really worth your looking at because it has many layers of ideas. I mean, it would be impossible for any reasonable person to read that speech and suggest that Trump was devoid of policies and devoid of ideas. And then equally important, I believe, in the long run, was his speech and the release in Charlotte of a New Deal for African Americans a few days later. These two documents represent a blueprint for the next couple of years that is profoundly different than where we have been. Now we're seeing a new phase of defining Trumpism in the very cabinet selection process. You know, the way he's assembling this cabinet is really very, very impressive. He is reaching far beyond the accepted establishment systems. For example, he is willing to assemble a team, and nobody's really put this together again because the elite media is so hostile that they can't bring themselves to stop and take a deep breath and look at what's going on. But he's assembling a team that no one was prepared for. Trump describes, and I recommend to all of you, The Art of the Deal, his bestseller from the 1980s. It's still the best single book in how he thinks. He describes over and over again that he wants the best. That when he has the right to build the Hyatt, which is his first big building in Manhattan, he wants it to be unique and the best. When he builds Trump Tower, he wants the atrium to be the best. I mean, he has this constant drive to be the best. And he's willing to work extra hard and to do what it takes to get the best. So let's look at the cabinet. General Jim Mattis is as good a senior officer as has served in the American military in the last generation. He's astounding. He's an intellectual. He's a warrior. He is totally patriotic. And Trump has said, in effect, I am willing to ask for the first waiver since 1950. Only one general has ever gotten a waiver to serve as Secretary of Defense. That was George Marshall during the Korean War. But Trump said, this guy is so good, I'll go ask for the waiver. And immediately Democrats began saying, I'm for it. And if you look, there's been almost no opposition to Mattis. Then he turned, remember, this is the guy that we couldn't trust because he didn't know anything about national security. So his first big choice is Jim Mattis. Then, remarkably, he picks John Kelly, Marine General, to be the head of Homeland Security. I've known Kelly since he was a colonel, and he was the Marine liaison when I was Speaker of the House. He is a remarkable public servant. He lost his son in combat. He is dedicated to serving the country, and he just finished serving as the head of the Southern Command in charge of all of Latin America. So he is perfectly prepared. I mean, he is literally the best person in the country you could ask. If you're serious about our southern border, there's nobody better than John Kelly. Now you can say, well, if you take those two and you add General Flynn, that's 3 generals, is that too many? Not for the American public. The only institution remaining that they don't think is corrupt is the military. If you say to them, oh gosh, shouldn't we replace 2 of those guys with lawyers? Or Harvard professors. I mean, just think about it. This is why the left is in such trouble. So, Kelly will be a remarkable leader, and if you read his very brief statement, he actually talks about the end of political correctness. Not quite the statement you might have guessed. And he knows more about controlling America's border and defeating both terrorists and drug dealers than anybody else I know of in the American system. Then you get to Rex Tillerson, who will be the current news media's horrifying example. Tillerson, I want to confess up front here, Tillerson has a huge problem. He's successful. Being successful in the largest corporation in the world, he's actually been involved in making money. It's going to get worse, I'm sorry, but the heritage tradition is one of speaking truth. Tillerson actually has gone around the world negotiating agreements with foreign countries, successfully, on behalf of an American company. Now, if you're John Kerry, or Hillary Clinton, or the entire State Department. And your entire career has been one of going around the world unsuccessfully, negotiating non-agreements. Tillerson is horrifying. I mean, what if he actually effectively represents America? What if we actually get good deals that create jobs in America? What if he's actually able to explain Trumpism to the world? And people go, because I guarantee you, all these foreign people he's dealt with his entire career, they didn't go, oh gosh, you're not going to send Rex to see me, are you? I mean, I haven't had lunch with Rex in weeks. He's going to be so well received around the planet that combined with Jim Mattis, he automatically changes who people think Trump is. They now around the world think Trump is smart enough to hire really smart people. And he's going to give them really smart orders. So, of course, Tillerson has to be attacked by the left because, I mean, if you can't attack the head of ExxonMobil, you need to give up your card in the Socialist Party and really just go home. But he is a remarkably successful, and what makes him even worse, he's an Eagle Scout. Wow. Now, there are various left-wing rallies where you go in and talk about Eagle Scouts and, whoa, what are they going to do next? That's that first step towards fascism. They wear uniforms. You can't tell what else is going to happen. I mean, this is the beginning of the militarization of America. They'll probably have girls sometime wearing uniforms too. By the way, the Girl Scout Manual of 1913 has girls in uniform and is entitled, What Every Young Girl Should Do for Her Country. It is a totally patriotic thing. It's worth your buying. You can get it down in Savannah at the home of the founder of the Girl Scouts. So, of course, the old order are just deeply worried. Now there's Dr. Tom Price. Not only did he replace me, he's a great doctor. His wife is a doctor. She's also now in the state legislature. But as an example of how bitter and unending the media is going to be, the New York Times manages to write an entire article about Mr. Price. Now, what you think about this? As you know, Dr. Jill Biden is always Dr. Jill Biden because she is Dr. Jill Biden. But Dr. Tom Price, who's a medical doctor, by the way, isn't Dr. Tom Price in the New York Times because that would imply that Trump had picked somebody for health care who actually knew something about health care. Now, given the left's constant track record of trying to find people who know nothing in order to put them in charge of things, you can imagine how shattering this has been. Price is a doctor, author of an Obamacare replacement bill, chair of the Budget Committee, and a great choice. Again, imagine Governor Nikki Haley for UN ambassador. A pick almost none of us would have predicted. Indian American, small businesswoman, governor. If only she were a liberal Democrat. The Times and the Post would be swooning with joy. Most brilliant pick possible. So, of course, she has to sort of mildly disappear because if they actually admitted that Trump had picked her, that would mean Trump may be more diverse than they think he is. Therefore, he can't have picked her. So she may well be ambassador for several years before you hear her name. Similarly, Betsy DeVos, a woman who has spent millions of dollars trying to help poor children get good schools. A woman who has devoted years of her life to school choice. A clear commitment to a contract, to a new deal for African Americans. Even better, Dr. Ben Carson. Cliff and I were very fortunate to be with Ben and Candy for a week last summer. This guy's amazing. He's a world-class pediatrician. He has spoken twice at the National Prayer Breakfast. He has written books that are used widely by homeschoolers. He has a movie made about him called Gifted Hands. And the news media thinks, oh, you know, he probably won't be able to learn enough to do HUD. None of the people who write this, by the way, have ever been in the HUD building. Or they would know that probably Ben will be okay. But I wrote a column about this. I do 2 newsletters a week at Gingrich Productions, free, by the way. And I wrote a column and said the real point here is moral authority. You are putting somebody who rose from poverty to become a world-class surgeon who is prepared to talk about morality, about family, about discipline, about the work ethic. And that makes Ben Carson potentially the most important symbolic appointment of the entire process. Now, faced with what may be the smartest cabinet of modern times, a post-pseudo-conservative, and we should be clear about this. The Post has no conservatives because that would be incompatible with their view. A pseudo-conservative described this cabinet as, quote, ignoramuses, billionaires, and a few generals. The person who wrote that, of course, it was an idiotic comment, and that person clearly is an ignoramus. But I'm going to close by suggesting you look at two books, and an article in a book, that set the framework for the movement that we're going to have to engage in. The article is by Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan. You can Google it. It's IYI. It's intellectual yet idiot. It's the most useful single article I've ever read. Taleb's point is that at least 40% of the governing elites worldwide are people who are really good at taking tests and writing essays, which gets them into really elite colleges where they take classes from professors who are really good at taking tests and writing essays. And so when they take tests and write essays, they get really good grades. So the professor then places them with a judge or a newsroom or a bureaucracy so that they can continue to take tests and write essays. He said the only problem with these people is they don't know anything. And so they could write a brilliant essay on how to change a tire, but if you showed up and said, my car has a flat, they would not know how to change the tire. These are the people, this was the best explanation of what I've been dealing with over the last, it explains 80% of the State Department. These are very, very erudite people who are idiots. They're intellectuals, but they're idiots. And one of the great things about Trumpism is if you build, Trump's not a financier. Trump's a builder. So if you build a building, it has to actually stand up. It's a very important principle. And so you are faced with the reality that you've been governed by people in both parties who wouldn't have a clue how to build a building. But they can issue regulations. And it explains and this is why this will be a huge ongoing fight for the next generation. Because we will be rooting out the intellectual yet idiots, all of whom will deeply hate what we're doing, and they will write brilliant essays attacking us for being against their right to be an idiot. The other book I recommend to you very highly is by Charles Murray. It's called Coming Apart. And it's about what's happened to white America. And he describes the rise of what he calls super zip codes. These are neighborhoods in which people are in the top 5% economically, and they're in the top 5% in educational attainment. And so he says people from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale marry people from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, and they then have children they send to prep schools. They can go to Princeton, Harvard, or Yale. They then live in a zip code surrounded by other people who went to Princeton, Harvard, or Yale, which is why none of them, when Trump began to rise, none of them understood the power of The Apprentice, because it wasn't on PBS. And it wasn't Downton Abbey. Now, I'm going to close and take a few minutes of questions. I apologize I ran quite this long, but I really think this is a very important turning point in American history. I cannot say to you too strongly, every day, by inertia, by bureaucracy, by hostility, by the very definitions of the old order, every day we will face active resistance trying to stop us from the revolution we need. And so we need a movement nationwide. We need to talk about and work about, and I hope that Heritage might let me come back over and do a series of talks building a series of principles that I think are at the heart of Trumpism. Because I think across the country, whether you're in the school board or you're city council or state legislature, or you're just a citizen trying to help, we need to really think through why is our side of this watershed, where we tell the truth, where we believe in the work ethic, where we want to strengthen America, why are we so different from the old order? And how can we make sure we're moving in the right direction? And I think it's really very, very important. And it's at the heart. Trump personally cannot succeed unless the movement succeeds. He knows that. That's why he talks about the movement. A key part of the movement is to find the people willing to move and get them to decide to actively be part of this kind of a future. And I apologize for